So thank you all for coming. Especially thank you on such a freezing night to come out and come to see this. Today our topic is Roman Egypt, Treasury of the Empire. It's a little different than our normal stuff. No pharaohs involved in this. But we're still in ancient Egypt. So it's a little bit of what happened after the pharaohs. And we're going to talk about the specialness of Egypt. Remember, the Romans ruled for almost 700 years in Egypt, so they had quite a history there. We're going to can't discuss everything about that long period. We're going to basically skim over the top, give a little bit of the military history, the economy and taxes, and then a little bit of what they touched on in science and religion. And we'll talk about how the Romans weren't really good to Egypt, but Egypt was really good to the Romans. I actually did a previous lecture on the Ptolemies, and this was the end of the Ptolemies. There's Liz Taylor and her two servants, Charmian and Iris. And the history books seem to go, or novels and movies, seem to go back and forth on which is which, the blonde or the African lady. So the names don't really matter, but there were her two servants that died with her. When Cleopatra died and took out the Ptolemaic dynasty, this was the best thing that ever happened to Rome. They not only got Egypt, they became incredibly wealthy, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit, and its impact on the whole Roman Empire and life across the world in many ways. Alexandria remained as the capital, and it was actually the second largest city in the empire throughout its time. There was probably a population of about 400,000, although the Romans did a lot to decrease that whenever they got a chance. It stayed as a center of learning for a good 400 plus years, but instead of having a royal enclosure now, the governor was a prefect with a special status within the empire. And there were 2 legions on garrison, so about 8,000 to 10,000 men garrisoning Alexandria, and it was still a reasonable place to live, still exciting, and later on, a lot of wealth flowed through the city. The key words are flowed through. This became the entrepot and the clearinghouse for a lot of, not just Egyptian, but worldwide trade coming through Alexandria and then heading out into the Mediterranean world. Again, the key words were flow through. First thing that happened after the Romans got a hold of Egypt in 30 BC, after the Battle of Actium and the death of Cleopatra, there was immediately a revolt in Thebes. The first governor, Cornelius Gallus, suppressed it quite brutally. You can see the Karnak temple there has now been turned into a fortress. It's basically not the capital of the area, but it was a large military garrison. It was of Upper Egypt, still running the place, and run out of here. Notice the Temple of Serapis over in the corner. So that was probably built under the Ptolemies. The Romans did try to not get the Egyptians to revolt all the time, so they continued to fund temples and stay as the benefactors of the common people, but not nearly on the scale that happened back during the Pharaonic times or even Ptolemaic period. Again, big fortress looming over Thebes and controlling the area. One interesting fact that I hadn't really run across in any of our previous lectures, there's one wall that actually has been covered with a fresco from the later Roman period. So it looks like a Christian church service or something like that. Most of it has worn away, so we can't see the whole thing, but there are remnants, that one being the main one, of the Roman period in Karnak. Egypt was a base to continue expansion of the empire. It was a while before Augustus, the first emperor, the Octavian that took out Cleopatra basically. It was a while before he got to the decision to the empire should stay within its current boundaries. So for a while they continued trying to expand the empire. Aelius Gallus, the second governor, the first one was nailed for corruption, brought home, and he committed suicide actually. Aelius Gallus launched an expedition to Arabia in 26 AD. Not very successful. Actually, I think that should say BC. I'm sorry. That's a BC date. Incorrect of me. He did take Mecca and Medina, but the expedition, which did get all the way down to modern Yemen, where they're fighting today, ultimately failed. Over 10,000 soldiers were lost. Number one, they didn't have enough water supplies. Surprise, surprise, it is Arabia. And number two, disease broke out, and so it spread throughout the army. They did get home, but it was seriously reduced. Why Arabia? Frankincense and myrrh were two of the most expensive products of the time, and this is one area where it comes from, along with Somalia, the coast of Africa here, and the trade ports. Aden was already a trade port, the port here on the southern coast, and was an access to the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the trade with India and Africa. It was a wonderful place. They were grabbing for it, and they failed. They gave up and never tried again. The next year, 25 BC, while most of the army from Egypt was away in Arabia, the Kushites, down in Nubia, did attack and took Philae, which is down near Elephantine in the first cataract. They wiped out 3 cohorts, about 1,500 troops, because there were 30,000 Kushites invaded, Nubians. And the Petronius was the general who grabbed about 10,000 troops, headed down south, and launched a punishment expedition. The Kushites tried to negotiate, bring peace. They captured a lot of slaves. They tried to give the slaves back, the Egyptians and Romans, and instead Petronius kept on going, said, no, 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 it's time to punish you. And he got all the way, they headed cross-country and got all the way to Napata here, which they sacked and brought home a lot of stuff. And at that point, they knew the capital of the Kushites at the time was Nero, here, down in just past modern Khartoum. Decided that that was going to be too hard, not enough food, water, supplies, etc. So instead they retreated, and then they had a fort built here at Premnes, which is not quite a legionary fort. They had a cohort or two and kept it going. That was the southern boundary for a considerable number of years. Kushites still tried to bring peace. They opened up negotiations, sent ambassadors that actually went up to the Mediterranean, up near Turkey, talked to the Emperor Augustus. The queen that sent them, the Romans thought, was Queen Candace in our writing. One of my co-workers said Candace. That's probably the first use of that name that we still use today. Well, in Latin, that's probably Candaki or Candeke. And instead, we found out later on that was not her name. That was the title of the queen of the Kushites. And she ruled, and there were successors. So it was a feminine-based rulership. They did establish diplomacy. They did establish ties. They became a southern tributary of Rome. And so the Romans like to say that their empire stretched all the way down here, even though no Romans other than a few traders probably went down into Nubia. One of the interesting things is this head. That is a bust of Augustus. It was found in 1910 in Nero, and it was dug up by archaeologists underneath the entryway into a temple. So they had taken this statue, beheaded it, and buried it, a place where they could walk on it all the time. They thought it was a nice way to insult the emperor every chance they got. The fort of Premnes may have been where that statue came from. It's a 250-foot hill overlooking the Nile. Again, this is Premnes up here, down past, not quite to the second cataract. It still exists today. It is a part of Lake Nasser, and this is an island sticking out of Lake Nasser, behind the high Aswan Dam. The Romans also still wanted to find the source of the Nile, and they sent an expedition under Nero, a little Praetorian detachment, a couple hundred people, a couple of centurions, a tribune was expected to have been in charge, and Seneca the younger, Seneca the elder was Nero's advisor until Nero decided to order him to commit suicide, and if you get the idea, the Romans were a little brutish. He did interview two of the centurions. Modern historians typically agree that the expedition got down to this area in southern Sudan, which is very swampy, and you can't really walk through it. It's, you got to go in individual type boats. It's swampy but extremely shallow, so it's tough going down here. However, there's some feeling now that they actually got up to almost Lake Victoria, because they described this scene, which is two rocks that the water spills out of. and that is called Murchison Falls, and they said that right behind it was a lake that fed it, and Murchison Falls is just before you get to Lake Victoria. So they described it fairly accurately. There's now a feeling that must have been Murchison Falls. Like I said, the Romans liked to reduce the population when they got a chance in Egypt. One of the opportunities came during the Jewish War, very famous, the siege of Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem. However, there was a large population in Alexandria as well. In fact, under the Ptolemies, the Jews in Alexandria had been given the status of Macedonians, which the Ptolemies were a Macedonian dynasty. So that was a high honor. They were treated as equals. They revolted in support of their religious co-religionists up in Palestine, and the Roman army turned out and massacred 50,000. That's not just 50,000 males, that's 50,000 period. They came across every Jew they could and killed everything that moved. Male, female, children, babies, their pets, their animals, massacred as far as they could. The population of Alexandria at the time is estimated about 400,000, so that's what, 1/8 of the population. In 2015, the Emperor Caracalla, if you've been to Rome and seen the baths of Caracalla, they're gorgeous. Caracalla was a monster, though. This is his coin. He liked to treat himself as the new Alexander. So in fact, here's a map with, this is Alexander's route as he went on his conquest down into Egypt, came back and went out to conquer Persia. So Caracalla's route in 214 through 216 did the same thing. He went on the same route, came down. He only went to Alexandria, didn't go out to the Oracle of Zeus Ammon out in the Siwa Oasis. But when he got there, he had a little problem with the Alexandrians. They had a great sense of humor, and they had been making all kinds of fun at his expense, all kinds of jokes about, haha, the new Alexander, etc., etc. So when he got down to Alexandria, he didn't have a sense of humor about it, but he made an announcement that he was going to form a new legion based on a phalanx, like Alexander's army, long spear-wielding people instead of normal legionaries, and he brought all the young men of the city out into the desert beyond it, formed them up, and went around, talked to them, punched their cheeks like a good leader, and told them what, asked them where they were from and what they did and all that kind of stuff. They were all excited and were expecting to join the Roman army. They didn't notice that the troops were surrounding them, and when he walked away, they massacred about 5,000 of them. Not a friendly time with them. What else did the Romans do? Well, first period of Egyptomania was during the period of the Roman Empire. If you've been to Rome, near one of the gates in the wall is a pyramid. It's the tomb of a merchant named Cestus. He was apparently quite wealthy, and he built a large pyramid. The different obelisks were all stolen from Egypt, and then they also built a few copies as well. There are more Egyptian obelisks in Rome now than there are in Egypt, by a factor of 2. There are 8 in Rome, there are 4 left in Egypt. This one in the Plaza de Popolo is from Ramses II period at Heliopolis. The one in the Vatican actually has no hieroglyphs on it. There's an interesting story about it. It was ordered moved from, it had been off on the side of the Vatican where there had been a chariot racetrack, and it had been in the middle piece. And when the Pope was building the Vatican, he wanted it moved over here. So in 1586, they commissioned Domenico Fontana to move it. And he took thousands of men and horses to drag this thing over, and he was so worried about it breaking that he actually had a horse in the side over here ready to hop on in case it broke so he could get the hell out of there. And then there was, rumor has it that he actually had relays of horses scattered across Italy because he wasn't staying anywhere near Rome if that happened. Luckily it didn't break, and it's still there today. There was a story that there had been a capsule, a globe on top of it that held the ashes of Caesar and Augustus, Julius Caesar and Octavian Augustus. That disappeared a long time ago. We don't know if that's true or why it wouldn't have been in their tombs, which were nearby. The tallest obelisk is in the Lateran, right outside the Lateran Palace, which was before St. Peter's got built. It was home of the popes. And it was actually from Tutmosis IV in Thebes. And then my favorite is this actually smaller one, but there's all kinds of papal insignias down below it, right in front of the Pantheon, my favorite building in the world. That's from a pharaoh I hadn't heard of before, Ebris and Sais. There are two other obelisks, just for a little trivia fact. One is Cleopatra's Needle in London, and that's Tutmosis III. And there's one in Paris, right outside the Louvre, and that is another Ramses II obelisk. Egypt. If you look at a history book, this is what you see. It looks like part of the empire. It is part of the empire. Geez, they get all these things from all over the place. There's copper and silver and gold from Spain, and there's pigs and tin from Britain, and there's all kinds of products from all over the empire. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Egypt, yeah, there's gold, there's ivory. They brought live elephants too for shows and gladiatorial events. That was sad. And then there's spices that came in. Okay, they give you an idea that there's some of those things. Marble. However, we're going to talk grain. Grain was very important. The Nile produced a great export, an excess of grain that they exported, and the Romans said, okay, great, we're feeding Rome. We'll talk about that. It was a special category. If this was weighted for the amount of product that went across the empire, this would be a very, very large piece. Why? Well, like Joe McCrae said, money makes the world go round, and it keeps the empires intact. Roman coins, gold, silver, copper, and these are Egyptian coins, or Roman coins in Egypt. They had actually a different monetary system. They kept them in a separate category. Here's your coins. I actually have one of these with that eagle on it, and that's a Ptolemaic eagle, not a Roman eagle. It was a continuation of their sort of stuff, whereas the Romans were largely producing portraits on one side of emperors or emperor's family or other people, and then the symbols were on the back. And the Egyptian line, it was more like the old Ptolemaic coins. So again, not a normal province. It was treated as a personal estate of the emperor. Well, Augustus knew what he got. It was rich, but I'm keeping it for myself. It's not to share. Life went on, but it was exploited for its wealth. The empire had different treasury accounts, if you will. There was one treasury account just for the army, and the army got paid and all their expenses paid out of it. There was the personal account, kind of like, imagine Queen Elizabeth in England having her personal accounts. And then there was the government account, and that one the senators actually had a little say on for a while. And then there were other things that were brought in later. There was probably a religious component once Christianity took over, but life went on. But Egypt fed the personal accounts and then the military accounts because the emperor ran them all, and he was the personal commander-in-chief of the army. The grain from Egypt, the grain dole is famous. Bread and circus kept the people happy, right? Circus was gladiatorial shows, the chariot races, the beast hunts, things like that, big feasts. But they made it eligible for 200,000 citizens who, because of their families and slaves, probably meant 400,000 people were being fed by the grain dole. And free, you got it all. You got a monthly packet of grain that you were expected to make bread out of or use for other things, porridge, whatever. A third of that came from Egypt. It was not the largest supplier, North Africa was. Roman population, the city of Rome grew to 1 million. If it wasn't for this influx of grain, they wouldn't have been able to do that. It also helped with the wealthy people, the aristocrats, the landed gentry, the equites and the senators. They got wealthy off it, not because of the grain, but since people didn't have to buy wheat, bread, etc., they were able to spend more on wine and olive oil, and that did come from their estates there in Italy or Greece or Spain. Another thing that Egypt provided was a massive amount of gold. The largest producer of gold was actually the mines in Spain. That area still hasn't recovered from ecologically, environmentally, from the mines out there. National Geographic ran a special a few years ago and showed that area is still just an absolute slag heap. And down in Egypt, there was a lot of gold down near, ooh, that's near where Primnus was. Okay, and out into the desert, into the eastern desert. There were other, this gives you a sense of some of the other resources available within Egypt. The copper mines go back to pharaonic times. The gold was traded from Nubia in pharaonic times, but the Romans moved down and exploited it directly. That's how they got their coin. That's how they got their bullion. That's how they kept their empire together. What do you need for an empire? You need an army. You need a big army. And actually, Egypt was lightly garrisoned. There were 2 legions, about 8,000 men in Alexandria. There was the prefect, and the prefect, again, this is a personal estate. This is my private property if I'm the emperor. We don't let the other senators go into Egypt except with the emperor's permission. If you have permission, you can go there. Tourism was a large draw to go down and see the sites throughout Egypt, the pyramids, Luxor, the Valley of the Kings, you name it. There were tourists. Alexandria itself was a big draw. So there was a lot of Roman tourism, but you had to get permission if you were of a senatorial class. In fact, Germanicus, one of the Emperor Tiberius's heir and his nephew, went there without permission. And he was a famous general, beloved by everybody, and he was in trouble for going down there. Unfortunately for him, and luckily for history, he ended up going up to Syria, where he died mysteriously. And before he got back and had to face any repercussions for going to Egypt without permission. And again, suppress uprisings in Alexandria, or like when the Jewish revolt, legions could move very quickly over to Palestine or to other areas nearby. There were auxiliary units down by Philae, smaller units defending the army. And this is the later Roman Empire. They were, again, 700 years in Egypt. There's a cavalry unit with the famous dragon pennants right outside the pyramids. Egypt provided so much of the resources to keep that army employed, fed, etc. When Nero died and the Julio-Claudian dynasty died, the family of Julius Caesar, if you will, Nero was the last. When he died in 69 AD, when he died in 69, it's called the Year of the Four Emperors, as 4 Roman generals and senators fought over the throne, and each one in succession fell. Vespasian had been the commander of Egypt, and then he commanded the Roman forces fighting the Jewish revolt, so he commanded both areas. When he went off to go fight Vitellius, and actually he stayed here, his generals, subordinate generals, went off to go fight for Rome. His last opponent was Vitellius, and he said his army will have to surrender if they want to get fed and paid. Why? Because Egypt was the source of both of those. So let's talk about Egypt and its contributions to the Roman economy. After the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Octavian confiscated not only the treasure, which we all knew about, he also went out and took 2/3 of the wealth of the richest people. You're wealthy, turn it over. And, turned over whether it was land or their coins, money, property, you name it. Rome was flooded with money. Prices doubled, interest rates went down by to 1/3 of what they had been. This helped Octavian at the time. He had to demobilize the army. He went from 50 legions when he combined his forces with Mark Antony's down to 28. So he had 22 legions he had to demobilize. He had to pay them off. He had to give them farms. Octavian didn't confiscate anything. They bought the farms at the market rate. So he took 22 legions plus the auxiliaries. And so that's like 220,000 men he had to find homes for, which he did. And we did this all using the riches of Egypt. Egypt initially provided, and these are, let's not stick on the numbers and try to do the math. Basically, 600,000 denarii are a talent. Probably heard the term talents before. 75 million denarii this is the annual input to Rome. 300 million sesterces. What are those? Well, a denarii is about the pay of a Roman soldier or a skilled worker. So you got a denarii a day. Okay? 300 denarii is basically almost a year's worth of income. A sesterce, that's a 4-to-1 ratio there. So a sesterce is 4 to 1, so the denarii, figure that's 100 to a few $100. Sesterce is about $25 to $50, okay? So that's the amount that was going to Rome. Here's a little math for the standing Roman army was 640 million sesterces. Other expenses, so you get about 1 billion sesterces are going out from flow. In the first century, Egypt added 300 million in addition to that 300 million. So Egypt is paying about 2/3 of the Roman tax base by the time of Diocletian, which was in about 380. How did they do that? Customs taxes were key, and we'll talk about trade. If you're trading between provinces, you got taxed by the Roman tax collectors, 2.5%. If you were trading external, outside, both coming and going, the Roman tax collectors took 25%, and they didn't care which 25%. You could give them the money, or you could give them part of the produce of whatever it was. They didn't care. They were going to use it, sell it, give it to the troops, or use it for other things. I was amazed at these numbers. I had no idea that Egypt provided anywhere between half, initially 1/3 to 2/3 of the Roman income. What's that mean? No Egypt, no Roman Empire. Indian Ocean trade. We actually have this, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea in the 1st century, which talked about all of these ports and how to get to them and what products they sold at them, all the way down the coast of Africa, all the different ports in India, what you could get at them, the frankincense and myrrh that you would get from Somalia and southern Arabia, how to get there. This is a 10-week voyage out, 10 weeks back, so this was an annual cruise kind of thing. The Ptolemies actually had found this way out. And the story's interesting. They didn't know how to get to India. There were traders kind of in the intermediate spots would meet, and they would get some stuff up here. And what happened was an Indian trading ship got shipwrecked, and somehow one of the Indian sailors got to Egypt. And he offered to show the Ptolemies how to sail the monsoon season and how to avoid it, sail one way, then sail the other way, and get to India and get back. And his only price was he wanted a trip back to India to get home. They took him up on it. They built a ship. They went out there, and suddenly there was now Egyptian trade going through the Red Sea and out to India. About 20 ships a year under the Ptolemies. The Romans said, hey, this is a good thing, and really beefed it up, and they were about 120 ships per year going out under the Romans. We'll talk about some of this area and what they did. There's tremendous resources, tremendous trade going through, and that's why, with the increase in trade, why they were able to increase their tax revenues so much. This was Rome's gateway to the world economy. 2 great books recently, both on trade. This one talks about, its subtitle is The Ancient World Economy and the Kingdoms of India and Africa. So the Romans, under Trajan, which happened about 115 AD, actually restored the Nile-Suez Canal that the pharaohs had built. Didn't sail big ships, but think of barges. So now it becomes easier to move large objects. Think of elephants that they were getting down here, or large amounts of ivory, they were actually bringing sand up too. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Whatever you needed, and then bring it out here where you could be picked up by ships, and then run down. The other choice was to come up here to one of the ports and go up Wadi Hammamet, where today, Laura was telling me about taking a trip down there, and you could still see the rest spots and the guarding fortresses that would cover that area as you moved up over to the Nile. However, travel by land is always more difficult. You need camels. Camel carries a lot less than a barge. So when this opened up, that opened up bulk terrain. Khorasan Islands, they've been in the news lately because of the fighting off Yemen. Khorasan Islands here actually became a legionary and naval base. They put a squadron of ships, a detachment of one of the legions. Actually, we know what it is. It's 6 ferrata, 6 Ironsides. The legion from Alexandria sent down large detachments to occupy these islands and keep the base. Why did they do that? Got to keep the pirates down if you want to keep the trade going. I did see a report a couple of years ago that there was also a legionary altar down at Param Island, which is right at the bottleneck at the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, right here, and it chokes it off. Haven't been able to find that since, but I did see that. I talked about the all-important customs taxes. Why did the Romans keep it at Alexandria that they collected it? So the merchants had to pay those transportation costs. Okay, you want to hire camels and lug your load across there, and then hire boats and bring it up the Nile, or you want to transship over here to barges? Great, go ahead. We're taking 25% once it gets here. Oh, by the way, most of the Indian kingdoms, when you got there, they charged 20%. So if you were trading whatever way you were going, there was a 45% load on any profits. And that's not just profits, the whole load. There was a 25% decrease. But this trade was so profitable that ships risked it all the time. Why? Because of all of these luxury items. Frankincense and myrrh. You've heard about that in the Christmas story. Just as an example, they did not travel for balsam. There was actually a grove in Palestine that became a bone of contention between Herod Agrippa and Cleopatra before the Romans came. During the Jewish revolt, there are stories about fights over that balsam grove. Why? Because a single tree would produce over its lifetime 1,000 denarii worth of balsam. That wood was absolutely critical, and it was the wood that they went for. So the Jews, knowing this, would go out and try to set fire to it. The Roman legionaries would go out and try to defend these shrub trees. And that became part of the fighting. Pearls, silk that came all the way from China because they hadn't let the secret out yet. Ivory, huge amounts of ivory came from India. Some came from Africa, but a big source was India because the tusks were bigger. And we not only have stories of tusks of elephants coming, but splinters. They would collect all the different pieces of elephant tusks to make things out of them. Turtle shells. I had to look up what the heck you would use turtle shells for, other than a famous Greek lyre musical instrument. And it's great for furniture. And ebony wood, also for furniture or for decorating construction. The spices. And this is a very, very partial list. There's a huge list of the spices. Cinnamon. There's one type of cinnamon, malabarthun. One leaf costs 60 denarii. Remember I said a denarii is a day's pay for a soldier. There's 2 months' worth to get a leaf of cinnamon. Most of cinnamon you get is bark that you get off the twigs, but for some reason you can also use the leaves. Cumin, vanilla, mint, peppers. Other things. Indian eunuchs actually became, during this period of conspicuous consumption, very conspicuous consumption, Indian eunuchs became a status symbol for the wealthy. Why? The thing to do was to have them be your wine pourer when you were throwing a dinner in your house, a little feast. Wild animals like leopards, tigers, elephants. Imagine the ships that would bring elephants across the Indian Ocean and up the Red Sea. They were called elephantogoi, and they were very dangerous ships in case the elephants got loose and were running from side to side. You had to very carefully handle them, and they were of strong construction. And I was surprised they were bringing in sand. Why sand? Because when you're cutting marble, it's not the saw that does all the work. The saw moves the sand. The abrasiveness is what makes the cut that goes down into marble. So you can get the slabs or the columns or the drums or the pieces for statues. And this was something I learned while researching this. Giant clams. It became another status symbol. The Romans were big for diverse diets. This became a symbol. You would use the clam as your centerpiece for the table for a feast. And they were called 3-bite clams because that'd be 3 servings right in there. They would cut the meat up and serve that to people. A little bit of ancient Epicureanism. Pearls. The oyster beds were in the Red Sea. Some are right outside the Farallon Islands. And then there was India, always a lot of places off the coast where people went pearl diving. Pearls were extremely expensive in the ancient world. They're still kind of expensive if you get the natural ones. Lots of the coffin portraits that we get out of Egypt, this is one, show pearl earrings like this, the triples on each side. So what have you done? You've showed off how rich you are, because these are tremendously expensive. There was one ancient writer talked about one woman was bedecked in so much jewelry, in particular pearls, but gold and other things too. Just the stuff she was carrying was worth about 40 million sesterces. 40 million sesterces is about the amount for the annual pay for 2 legions and all the auxiliary troops for a year. So lots of, again, this was a period of conspicuous consumption. This is a picture of the mosaics in Ravenna. I was actually looking for Justinian, but this is his queen, his empress. Look at all the pearls on her. That's all pearls there. The large drop ones, the whole necklace, and she's even got them all across her head and hanging down. But of course the empress can afford stuff like that. Tremendous wealth. Also, pearls were valuable for the merchants. Why? You could hide them in a little bag in your pocket, and the tax collector might not find them. Other objects we liked: frankincense and myrrh. Ancient costs, 6 to 10 denarii per pound. This is what frankincense looks like. This is the oil droplets that you can create. These are the tears when it dries. This is the gum that comes out of the tree. These are frankincense trees. That's what they're under tremendous stress today. These are them in Yemen and Somalia. This is what it looks like growing up. Once it gets more mature, they trim them. This is an orchard, actually. This is frankincense, more golden. This is myrrh, more brownish. These are their trees, more scrub-like to me. This is myrrh, 50 denarii. While I was researching this, I found out you can still buy this stuff on Amazon and have it shipped to your house. For a pound, there's 2 months' pay for a Roman soldier, right? It might cost you today, let's see, myrrh is about 25 bucks a pound, and frankincense is about 10 to 14, depending upon how much you get it, and the quality and the beauty of it. You can get oil. I found out Savory Spice in Southland's mall, and other malls sells it. But when I went there, I found out it's only for the Christmas holidays. Again, frankincense and myrrh for Christmas. But the wise men brought for Jesus. But it is available also in some New Age stores and some health stores. Or, like I said, look for it online. What else? Luxury furniture material. Ivory. That I couldn't find a picture of an actual Roman piece of furniture made out of ivory. This is from Mesopotamia, about 800 BC, a bed. This is a more modern, I'm not sure how modern, I'm guessing 1800s, 1700s, but could be more recent. This is what ivory furniture looks like when it's actually worked, and put the cushions on, the inlays. Gorgeous, gorgeous. This is what a Roman home looked like. Tortoiseshell, table, boxes. Imagine a Roman, I always picture the movie Spartacus where, you know, everything looked like slapped together wood and some ropes. Instead, they lived a life of luxury, okay? Ivory and tortoiseshell furniture all around. Ebony wood. These are old. Ivory is now illegal. Tortoiseshell is illegal since the 1970s. You can trade what was already made, but don't try to make any new. Ebony you can still find. This is what I found online. It's only $17,500. The Antonine Plague upset everything in the reign of Marcus Aurelius. He had his army besieging the fortresses in Mesopotamia, and his troops came down with a plague. Modern scholars think it's smallpox, kind of described it by the famous physician Galen. Looks like it to me. Pustules, all kinds of bad things happen to your body, high death rate. There's evidence that China also had it during this period and lost about 25 million people. They think that the Roman Empire may have lost 25% of its population. In Egypt, we have papyri that say that some of the villages were abandoned. Some of them lost 70% of the population. Irreparable harm to the trade. What does this mean? Well, yeah, you got less people, but you also have a lot less tax money coming in. This is also, if you follow the fall of the Roman Empire kind of history books, one of the things that happened was the Romans started bringing in German barbarians and other people into their army to fight for them. Why? Because the army was paralyzed by this disease. The manpower of the country had been so reduced that in order to keep the army up to strength, they had to invite in non-Romans from Northern Europe to go in and start manning up, not just Germans, but Scythians and all kinds of people were brought in to start manning up the Roman army. Start of the downturn. Another problem with trade. It's one-sided. Romans didn't produce anything that the Indians really liked other than maybe wine. So what are they sending? Gold, silver, coins. The empire almost got denuded. By the time of the late 200s, they were starting to go back to a barter economy. Pliny, the elder, warned about the flow of coinage. He said, this is a problem. We can't start sending all of our wealth out of the country in order to put pearls on ladies' ears and have all the luxury furniture. We got to go back to old-fashioned way of living. But of course, nobody listened. People want their luxuries. They want the jewelry. They want to be able to show that they are wealthy. They're cut above. And the flow kept on going. Big hoards have been found in India. One hoard had 2,000 gold coins. Another one had 1,100 silver coins. The Indians liked Roman coins because they were pure. Purity was high. The gold coins kept their purity. The silver coins started to be debased. And the Indians started getting accepted. I collect some of the, I don't have any gold coins. I have some silver ones and some copper ones. And I don't like the ones from the late empire. They're ugly. They're thin. They've been debased. Some got down to 2% silver. So you have rampant inflation. You have coins that nobody wants. Trade became a problem, but it did stay up. They found ways around it. Sometimes they just shipped them pure bullion. Rome stayed important. Egypt stayed important to Rome. If you've heard of Zenobia, she was the queen of Palmyra, which has been in the news lately when ISIS went in and started dynamiting some of the temples. From Palmyra, when Rome was in severe distress, she and her husband, Odenath, manned up armies that were made up largely out of here, took over the Roman troops too, and fought off the Persians. And then she also turned around and grabbed these provinces, including Egypt, off the Romans and said, okay, I'm declaring independence, and now I have the Empire of Palmyra. And the Roman Empire didn't like that. The Emperor Aurelian immediately came down, launched an expedition, went out to Palmyra, captured Queen Zenobia and brought her back in chains to Rome, because you can't have a Roman Empire without Egypt, as we've been talking about. Slightly different topic. One of my favorite people in antiquity, Hypatia. There's an outstanding movie about her that I learned about at ESS meeting called Agora. Rachel Weisz plays Hypatia. And it's set in ancient Alexandria in her lifetime, more around the 400s when she was already getting more mature. We don't know exactly what we did. We only saw writers talking about what she did. She was an astronomer, a mathematician, and a philosopher. A philosopher back in those days covered all kinds of fields. She taught, and we know that. She taught in the school. Now the main library had been burned down. She probably taught at the Serapeum, which was the daughter library, as it was referred to, in Alexandria. She was the head of the Plato school in Alexandria. When she died, that marked the end of Alexandria as a main center of learning. It was kind of off the map, and that's because it had some problems. The movie actually has a gentle version of her death. There are stories when she actually was called to a meeting with the prefect, and she was waylaid by Christians at the time who had been encouraged to go get her by the archbishop. I want to say his name was Saint Cyril at the time. Her death was either very gentle, as in the movie where she was strangled with a scarf, or it was quite horrific where it involved tiles and clamshells mangling her body. And they don't show that in the movie, thank God. believe it or not, the Christians didn't dislike her because she was a pagan, and she was one of the last famous pagans. They disliked her because of her science. Because at the time, the early Christians were more, everything's about faith. We don't want to hear about science. So this was a extreme case, and it cost her. Interestingly, she has kept her reputation through the years. Not only do we have the picture, the movie, and I highly recommend it. I have a DVD of this. If you haven't seen the movie, Agora, it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. This painting, which also shows up in the movie The Agony and the Ecstasy, as Charlton Heston is painting the Sistine Chapel. He didn't paint this. This was painted by Raphael over in Pope's living quarters. That's Hypatia there in the white. So during the Renaissance, she was already still recognized along with all of the great philosophers of time. Plato, Socrates, a number of other famous philosophers are in there, and Hypatia is considered among them. And I wanted to mention the Hypatia project, which I ran across while researching this. It's an EU project. European Union actually runs a large-scale website and project to bring in, they have board meetings and all kinds of things going on, outreach projects, to encourage women, young women, to get in, teenagers, to get into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And so her legacy lives on. I mentioned we were going to cover a little bit of religion. Religious hermits at the time. The Egyptians made the transition from paganism to Christianity fairly early, and with the old-time Egyptian love of religion, the old temples for the pharaonic gods, let's call them, the old Egyptian pantheon, were kept up for a while, but probably disappeared during around the 4th century, maybe through the 6th, but by that time they were all gone. The empire basically had outlawed paganism in the early 400s. So people migrated over to Christianity because it was a faith-based religion, and they adopted very easily. But one of the famous things that Egypt did was they basically introduced hermits and ascetics to the world. So if you read about hermits across Europe back during the Middle Ages, they got their cue from Egypt during the empire. Where did they live? Well, out here in the desert. Just south of Alexandria is an area called Wadi Natrun, and that was a big area where they went off to live. They lived in small settlements like this. They're still out there. Not the monks, and it was men and women, so monks and nuns, and each of those is a small little cell, if you will. And a lot of them were living off of they weren't producing anything, they were just studying God and Jesus. And so this is a map showing 130 of those in one little community. This is one that's been dug out. They provided the model for the monasteries and the nunneries across the Middle Ages. They grew out of this kind of movement. This kind of grew up naturally. The first ones were St. Anthony and St. Paul. They were written about. They survived. Why? Because the Christians through the Middle Ages, living in the monasteries and copying over old Latin and Greek texts, they liked to read about and copy over the lives of the saints. And so these went over, made its way through the Dark Ages, and we still have a number of the lives of the saints. Like I said, Anthony and Paul are two of the most popular in the religious world right now. Interestingly, one of the reasons why they survived and are so interesting is because the stories talk about all of the demons, and these people were living off of almost nothing. I can't remember if it's Anthony or Paul. I want to say Anthony. He survived because supposedly a raven brought him half a loaf of bread each day. Okay, nice miracle if you can arrange it. Had serpents and demons approach him and try to convert him. And of course, with almost no food and no water, he was probably in a daze most of the time and probably quite not coherent all the time. Well, in his meandering, wandering mind, some of those demons came and tempted him with ways of the flesh. So there are quite interesting stories that you can just imagine the monks in the Dark Ages in Europe hiding under their bunks in their cells and pulling them out to read. Ooh, here's the good parts. And some of this still survives. This is one modern one, and actually they're seeing a little bit of revival with people going back out in the desert. I forget the location, near Kelia. It's out here, and it is having a second life, if you will. The movement lives on. So again, I've covered a little bit across the top of Egypt. We've covered a little bit of the military history. We've covered the economy. Just really discussed how important it was to the Roman Empire. And we discussed some of the more interesting things about all those goods and trade and the economy and its contribution to the Roman Empire, which was, I gotta say, as I found out as I was researching this, way outsized compared to what I thought it was. I knew about the grain ships, I knew about the gold mines down south. The trade with India and the East just blew me away. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
All the ports that you had identified in the margins of the Red Sea, have any been tentatively identified as possibly being the ancient Punt?
Ancient Punt, you talking about like where Hatshepsut's expedition went down to? Yes, that's equated down to an area in Kenya. Of the two books I showed, one talks about that a little bit, and the one about Rome and the world economy in the Indian Ocean. So yes, they think they have identified it. It's not positive, it's more all of the circumstantial information. Good question. What else? Yeah, Dave.
You didn't mention the spread of Egyptian religion through the Roman Empire, because they worship goddesses like Isis up in Germany and England.
They did, you're right. And Serapis? Yes. I've seen a Serapis temple in just outside of Naples, yes. And there was one in Rome too. And there was a temple of Isis in Rome. Yeah, I did not. That kind of goes along with the Egyptomania. There was a lot of trade back and forth of cultural stuff, not just obelisks and the pyramid, but you're right, there were temples scattered throughout. They did adopt. It wasn't so much other than Isis, I don't think there was a lot of the other Egyptian gods. It was mostly Serapis and Isis. However, I did see some objects of Hathor that were scattered across the empire. Any other questions? Yeah.
Your map that showed the trade all the way back to China.
Okay, let me pull it up.
It seemed to me to be a northern Silk Road. Did they not use the southern Silk Road also?
You're absolutely correct. They did. That was the Silk Road. That was the traditional one. And the Silk, this was a bit of the conflict between Rome and Persia. The Persian Empire tried to maintain control over the Silk Road, the Silk trade between China and the Mediterranean world, because of the profits were immense on that. So instead, what this is showing is the way to bypass Persia. We're not seeing the land route, we're seeing the route to get it down to the ports down here. So that did happen. They did take silk by ship in order to avoid the Persians. In addition to that, there was some trade, actually, and this doesn't show it because this is really just based upon that periplus, the one document. There was a later, and this is the 1st century, in Marcus Aurelius's reign, which was 160 to 180 AD roughly, there was a embassy to China, which we know about from Chinese records. But it wasn't an official embassy, it was the emperor or his administration asked some merchants to keep on going and get to China. So they did get to the court. Unfortunately, they didn't have a very positive impression, leave a positive impression on the Chinese, because they didn't bring any fantastic goods with them. They brought their normal trade stuff and said, here's a sample. And the Chinese imperial court looked at it and said, yeah. Why? And they had heard about Rome through all the intermediaries, and they heard that it was equivalent to them, and it was a great power out here, and they needed to make contact, but there was too much in the way. So they were actually looking forward to meeting Romans. What happened was, when that happened, it was like, well, these aren't the Romans we expected. We expected the representatives of a great power like we are, and we're getting some second-class dollar store type guys. And unfortunately, and nothing else happened after that. That's the one time that there was official contact. There has been Roman coins found in both Japan and China. We think it was trade with the intermediaries. There were also some people went to Sri Lanka, and there was a little bit of trade with over here in modern Burma and Thailand. Unfortunately, trying to find your way through here, if you haven't already been there, and there was a lot of reasons for all these people not to tell you where they were. There's the straits here of Sumatra, and then there's the strait here. Other than that, if you don't know how to get by this barrier, you're not going.
The southern one that I'm talking about went below the Himalayas.
This kind of route? No, I'm not aware of it, didn't come across it in this study. I'll look it up. Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
What happened to Egyptian society religion once Rome pulled out?
Rome didn't pull out. They kept it until the 600s when Islam came in. Okay? The Arabs conquered the area, I want to say the 630s, 640s. And at that time, the ancient Egyptian religion was largely gone. It had all become Christian. And in fact, during the Crusades in the 1100s, 1200s, there was major fighting in Egypt. Alexandria had been seized at least twice on campaign. There were major attempts to grab Cairo. They always got repulsed eventually. The population in Egypt was still considered majority Christian at that time. And now we're down to what, 15%? Not even? 10? Less? Okay. So yeah, it was largely Christian, and basically it's been Islamized over the centuries. Yeah.
Coptic.
Coptic Christian. Yeah.
Just for dates, Muhammad's born about 640, and about 710 to 704 to 720, along in there is when it starts to expand out of Arabia into Egypt. So it's a little later.
We'll talk about that later. Thanks, Robert.
The other question, I had a comment also. Silk is also produced in India, but it's different from Chinese silk. Can we tell whether the Romans were getting Indian silk itself?
I did not see any reference to Indian silk. Indian cotton was in high demand, but not Indians. I didn't run across Indian silk at all. That's another thing I'll need to look up. Thank you. Yeah.
I just pulled up a map of the Silk Road from 300 BC to AD 100, and it shows that northern route. It doesn't show anything to the south.
I'll let you and Chris go at it occasionally.
Just Google Silk Road, China.
Thank you. Thanks. Great questions. Anything else? Okay, I'll be around for, yeah, go ahead.
Romans were getting cotton from Scythia, India, and so on, but they had no idea what it was, and they became this legendary. They thought it, some sort of wool-bearing trees, and the Greeks called it. There are little drawings of plants that have little lambs. Because, so they call it the vegetable lamb of Tarshish, or somewhere. They didn't know that it was something completely different. The only fuzzy white thing they'd ever seen before was wool. This was more fuzzy white stuff. They figured, but they knew that it grew on plants somehow, so there are drawings of little lambs growing on trees.
Well, they got that right. It was growing on plants.
It was.
Thank you. That was a good point. Again, thank everybody for coming tonight. I know it was a harsh night out, and we really appreciate your coming. Thank you very much.